Okay, welcome to day 2 of the Cinder part of the virtual PTG. So today we're going to be discussing drivers completely. Just some last minute stuff left over from yesterday. The poll was completed for virtual happy hour, and we decided to do it tomorrow at 15:30. So be ready for that. And then just as a reminder, we're going to take our team photo. The last session on Thursday is the general team retrospective, so we'll do the team photo during that. I don't know exactly how we'll do it because with Blue Jeans, you don't see everybody's face all at once. With MeetPad, you get more people all at once. So maybe we'll switch to MeetPad to do the photo. I just don't know. But if anybody has any good ideas for how to handle that, that's fine. Either that or we all just take selfies and email them and somebody makes a photo montage of it or something. So that's still to be determined. So the Etherpad is in the chat. We'll do the same thing we did with the recording yesterday. So I'll try to keep the screen share of just the Etherpad. So just open the Etherpad yourselves and you can type in it and it will be updated dynamically and we can keep track of that. And then I had something else I wanted to discuss, but I can't remember what it is. Okay, so I guess we're all set. Oh, we're going to do a retrospective today focusing on drivers and, yeah. So there's a survey up, there's a link there. If you haven't taken it yet, it's just 3 questions. And then we'll look at those at the end of today's sessions. Okay, what I wanted to do is just, since the time's kind of compressed, is just find out if anyone had any second thoughts or wanted to do any follow-up from yesterday's discussion. Which if you scroll back, you can see what we were talking about. The one thing I wanted to follow up, I should shut up and let people talk, actually. So let me do that, and then I will fill space if nobody's got anything to say. Okay. What I wanted to, so we had a discussion about quotas and talked about that a bit. What I didn't get clearly from that was, is there anyone here who's particularly interested in working on that stuff? The silence is deafening. But anyway, it's a way to have a high impact on the project because it's a pain point for operators, and it would be good if we can get that stuff fixed. So anyway, you can think about it, maybe talk to your manager to see if they will support you in doing that. And then as you could tell from the discussion yesterday, everybody's got lots of ideas about ways to fix this. So you won't be on your own working on this. There'll be plenty of help. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so just one last, any other follow-ups from yesterday anyone wants to bring up? Okay. All right, then let's just kick in. So we've got some technical issues that people want to discuss that impact drivers. So let's start with the generic NFS driver. So the show, you're here, I think.
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Good morning, and
good morning.
Thanks for participating. And I will let you do the talking from now on, and I will mute myself.
So a quick background. There's a first-party driver, generic NFS driver, which has several operations implemented, and some third-party drivers relies on this implementation. And in particular, Cobite and NetApp drivers are using this online extended volume feature that is broken now in the generic NFS implementation. I'm not sure if I pasted the error log in the bug report. Actually, it was reported by Arthur, and he did paste the error log. So it seems that the volume file in the NFS share is locked by the first by the QEMU process, and it's not allowing the QEMU image process to extend the volume file. So I think Brian suggested to fix it in 2 steps. So first, we need to make all the related drivers to report that these drivers actually do not support the extend attached volume feature. And Sylvan Kaiser's, I think, he's here. So he created a patch and he already submitted it. And the most difficult part is to the most difficult part is the second one, which is to figure out how to do the operation safely and re-enable that functionality. So I'm not sure why it stopped working. Maybe it was not, the QEMU process was not locking the volume file before, and it started locking. I didn't manage to look at the commit history and see when it stopped working. So I would be glad if you guys have some guess on how to fix it.
So we do know that it was working at some point.
Sure.
I suspect that it probably was working at one point. It's hard for me to say for sure, but there's been a handful of changes in this area over time, both in QEMU and QEMU image, using locking in ways that it didn't used to. Some of that may also be deployment dependent on NFS v3 versus v4 and what you have configured at the NFS layer to enable locking to work. But the general picture is, I think there was a few changes over the last couple of years to actually lock files that are used off of these NFS volumes in ways to make things safer and more robust than they used to be, which could easily explain why maybe this used to kind of work, and now it throws an error.
Yes, I think this is Sylvan Kaiser speaking. Hello. I think QEMU introduced more internal logging around versions 2.10 or 2.11, I think, in that area. They affected several aspects, and I think this is one of those two.
Right, because we had to change a bit of code around, I think it was for QEMU image info operations, where we had to add an argument that said do it without locking whenever that was changed. So this affects the generic NFS driver, and then other drivers are also using the same extend code, right?
I think most of the remote FS-based drivers will probably be affected by that.
Maybe we might check other third-party drivers as well. I think there are 2 or 3 more drivers with NFS protocol. Let me see the support matrix.
I do not think this is tied to the NFS protocol. Cobalt does not use the NFS protocol, but its own, and we are still affected. It's, I think, the simple fact that the Nova instance locks the image file, and therefore the Cinder process trying to run changes on the file is blocked by the lock, regardless of the protocol that is used to access the image file.
Yeah, that sounds likely to me.
So probably what we need to do is to find out if there's a way with QEMU to do this at all. On the one hand, if there's any way to run the extension operation while the file is in use, and if yes, what we have to meet in order to achieve that, if that's doable at all with the new logging.
So I don't know. I don't know what would be involved as far as enabling extending the file while it's in use again. The alternative to trying to, do whatever we would do to allow it to be extended, this could be achieved as far as just the semantics of the operation are concerned by doing things like just cloning a new file and then doing a libvirt block rebase kind of operation to migrate from the old one to the new one. I mean, that has performance implications, but there's certainly some ways that you could do it. I think it would take some real studying to figure out what the best thing would be that we actually would want to do.
Could we use the QEMU monitor block resize thingy?
Well, I think that's what the libvirt stuff is kind of based on. I'm not sure what that is exactly.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, there could well be an operation in QEMU like that that's wired through libvirt where we can actually just ask Nova to make it bigger.
Yep, that's what I think there is. Let me see if I can add an example. Okay. I copied that from somewhere, but yeah, it's basically the block resize. And I think we would need to do this on the Nova side. That works only for images, not for block devices. But I think probably that's what we want.
Yeah. So that would involve basically having some infrastructure for extend the same way that we do QEMU assisted snapshots, where you start the Cinder operation and then it hits a Nova API and asks it to do this and waits for it to finish and that kind of thing.
Yeah, same that we do with light migration. for volumes,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah, I mean, there's
And if I'm not mistaken, we currently have it because Nova has to call OSBreak afterwards. First, it calls Cinder, tells it to extend, then goes back and tells OSBreak, hey, the volume in the backend has been resized. Please make the local changes to reflect that. So we either add it on the OSBreak side, which I think would be wrong, or in Nova when it calls, makes that call.
Yeah, I mean, I think it lines up well with the model for how we do snapshots there, where there's a Nova API that is implemented mostly through the libvirt driver in Nova to block rebase, block commit, that kind of thing. In this case, it would be a block resize, but it's the same kind of model. I think before, the idea when we turned this feature on was that we could just kind of sneakily extend the file without telling Nova, and things would mostly work out okay. Which was probably true at the time. I think it generally worked. This gives you the advantage too, though, of in the previous situation when it worked, it didn't do a request to tell the instance to rescan for the new size, I think. So it would still remain as the old size until you did something that would cause it to update the volume in Nova. I'm not too clear on how fully implemented that whole feature is of telling Nova that we've extended a volume and that it needs to rescan. Is that something that generally works at this point?
Yeah, I think it works. For the RBD driver, it was not working because nobody had tested it, so we had a failure in there. But since it's done automatically by the protocol, I think Lee Jarwood removed that exception raising, so it should also work for RBD. And I have tested it for iSCSI, and it works fine. So I think in general it's working.
Okay. Cool.
Is it a bad idea to perhaps preventing the QEMU from locking the volume file? I mean, maybe there's a flag to just avoid the default behavior of locking the file. Maybe it's
I think the reason that is done is that Nova really wants to do that to make things like live migrations less hazardous, because it keeps you from accidentally spinning up instances on both sides that are using the same disk and corrupting it and that kind of thing. So I think it was a very intentional design decision from Nova that they wanted that locking to actually operate anyway.
Does that seems to give you some direction to go this year?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. We can talk later, Kaisers, just together, maybe how the school bytes addressing that, and maybe we can see a better approach together.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Thanks.
I see somebody added a comment about testing.
Guess who? Luigi
Yes,
here. Hello.
I didn't want to stereotype you, but I figured it was Luigi. So it looks like we do have tests in place for this, which is good.
We do run with the DevStack plugin NFS, but we don't enable the extend attach volume tests. So that may be something we should try to do if we have a patch which fixes this, we should try to enable this, or we can also have like a do not merge patch just to see whether enabling this works for real or not.
So that's good. So we can keep that in mind as you're working on the code and reviewing that we've got tests in the gate that you can enable to actually use the functionality. So that's good. All right, great. I like this idea of free testing. It's just sitting around waiting to be used. Okay. Any other comments or questions about this one? Okay, great. All right, thanks. So it looks like we got a direction to go in, so that's good. Okay. Oh, did I scroll too much? I think I did. I'm sorry. I'm got too many windows open. I'm completely confusing myself. Okay, so the next thing on the schedule is someone had proposed. How do I put this? So I haven't been working on Cinder long enough to have experienced this myself, but I've heard that this proposal keeps coming up and being rejected. So we should be clear about what's happening.
Is the submitter of this year?
I'm not sure, but don't know his real name.
Well, so yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with this. Or did you want to start with this, Brian?
No, because I really don't know much about it, so I was hoping you would. So if yeah, submitter's not here, so go ahead, Eric, and we can catch up.
It's so the general idea is people are trying to figure out how to run Cinder with the highest possible performance local storage. And so they look at something like the LVM driver where data is stored on the same node as Cinder and maybe your instances. And the general idea is they say, well, this would be a lot faster if we got this whole iSCSI stack out of the way of this thing and just opened volumes as devices instead of connecting to them via iSCSI to the same node. Which kind of makes sense. I mean, you remove, some amount of overhead by doing that. The reason that this was rejected historically was basically a philosophical decision around just the fact that it makes it a bit different from other volume drivers. And so you have volumes that kind of work in a very constrained situation where you know what node the volumes are on and you know what node the instances are on, and you don't ever need to migrate them to another node. So you have a single point of failure now, and Cinder backup may or may not have a good way to function with this, and that kind of thing. So I think when we talked about this years ago, there was kind of a collective, yeah, it would kind of work, but we just don't really want to worry about all the implications of having this weirdly shaped driver. Personally, I would not be terribly inclined at this point to be too attached to that argument, but that was the reason that we didn't do this a few years ago. It's certainly conceivable that you could build up this driver and stick a bunch of disclaimers on it that says it does this and it doesn't do these 10 things, and maybe people will find that useful. I don't know.
Is this assuming that Cinder's running on the same node as Nova? Because I don't see how this works otherwise.
Yeah, that's really the model, is you want to have Cinder managing storage that's local to the node, and the instance has to be there too, or it doesn't really make sense.
I'm thinking that maybe we can have an alternative to a different driver, something like that. It's basically for the LVM driver to have an option where you tell it that you want to try local attachments, and the OS break, then when it receives this, it tries to do give the direct device mapper for the LVM location instead. Instead of adding a new driver, you just add new information to the connection info. You pass it along, and the destination see if it's local or not. If it's local and it can directly access the device mapper for LVM, it passes that to Nova instead. And if it's not there, it does the iSCSI attachment. This is something you enable in Cinder. By default, is disabled. And that way, we don't have to actually maintain two different drivers.
And I think that's generally what this proposal that's linked here suggests, is extending the LVM driver to do this. And I assume in Cinder terminology, this would basically be, yeah, so they basically propose introducing a direct target driver that you could use with the LVM backend to do this.
And they want this because the LVM class inside of Nova libvirt is extremely limited and they can't do what they want with it. And Cinder's LVM implementation has more APIs that they could do things like resize. I'm looking at the list in that the README that he wrote. I'm trying to understand where he's coming from. Not being able to scale compute and RAM storage independently. I'm not sure I get that with using Nova LVM, because it's a completely separate class that, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general idea is they really just want the Cinder management plane for the storage instead of using LVM directly in Nova. And I don't know what all you can and can't do with LVM in Nova, but I would assume that we can do quite a few things that aren't really available if you're not using Cinder. It says they tested retype and snapshots and image uploads and downloads.
Yeah, but the way the proposal is slightly different because it's adding a new target. What I was suggesting is no new target, no new anything. What you do is similar, but you do it in the LVM driver instead of adding a new target. That way, it doesn't matter if it's TGT, if it's LIO, and it also allows you to work on the same node on a different node. It's not limited to only local attachment. That way, if at some point you need to move your instance, do a migration, do something, you can actually do it. I think it.
Oh, I kind of like the restriction of if you're using this, it's only for the local node, because if we make it a more general case, well, I don't know. I don't want to have to worry about testing volume migration from this thing into iSCSI, and it's a whole bunch of complexity, I think, if we do it that way. I kind of like the fact that this is shaped like a, this is one little thing and this is what it does, and that kind of model.
I'm just worried that in the future somebody, if we have this, will say, hey, now I want to move this and I cannot I want to move my instance and have the volume still working because I have to shut down Nova for a while, whatever.
No, I agree, but I mean,
yeah.
We were going to have to put a bunch of disclaimers on this that says basically, like, you probably don't want to do this unless you have some really particular use case. Because for most people, it's just not going to make sense to use this.
I agree with Eric, and in the past we got block device driver who was pretty same, but not with LVM, and we decided that local touch, it's not cloud native feature, and we decided to drop the driver again.
I agree with you, Ivan, on having a completely different driver. To me, it doesn't make much sense for the same reason you said. But I'm not talking about a different driver, a different target. My idea is just, let's call it an optimization, which is if it happens that Cinder with the LVM is co-located with Nova on the same node, OSBrick, if you have enabled it in Cinder, OSBrick will skip the iSCSI layer. If it's not co-located, you will still use iSCSI. That's slightly different because you have all the features in there. Yeah.
I understand your point, but you also mentioned that each will have an issue with volume migration, and it's pretty big issue.
With my feature, no. With what I'm saying, you don't have an issue with any of the features because detach doesn't have to do anything. Attach just has to return the path. So check if the path is there. If it's there, that's what you have to use. If not, you go and do the normal iSCSI connection. The one that has the problem with migration is the proposal that it's linked there, which adds a new target. That one cannot do any of the light migration or the thing. Yeah. So that's why I was proposing the other one, but I understand Eric's point, which is basically, I don't want this to bring trouble to the rest of the LVM driver that we have.
Yeah, I see. It could be a good option for the performance perspective. But I'm not sure how many users do need such feature, because we removed block device driver a few years ago, or maybe 4 years, I don't remember. And we were asked about such feature twice, I guess. If this feature is only needed for 1 or 2 users, they always can do this customization with out of tree driver or out of tree target driver. What else?
Yeah, I don't see too many instances, but from time to time I do hear people asking for it. So if it's not too much work and we don't run the danger of breaking anything in Cinder, maybe it's worth. Yep.
From my experience, our customers are moving away from LVM to Ceph or some hardware storage. So I don't really think that there are a lot of users with LVM in production, and I don't know. If this feature is really needed for a lot of users, it's okay, but if only few of users will use this feature, I don't think it's a good idea to add it.
Well, that's why I like the idea of having it be a small, isolated thing that the people who want it can use it, but we don't have to tie it into everyone else's concerns in Cinder. The users that always appear talking about this stuff, the common thread to me seems to always be, I have some really fast NVMe storage, and this is the only thing I can come up with that will run fast enough to actually use it. I think is the kind of the thing that generates this kind of idea is people just wanting something that can actually do I/O as fast as their hardware can do it. I'm also wondering if as another alternative that wasn't considered here, I think the LIO target stuff, you can actually do a direct kind of SCSI emulated attach without iSCSI through the LIO target. And I wonder if this would be easier to handle if we just embedded the whole thing in the LIO target. I don't know if that would be simpler or more complicated.
To me, that sounds more complicated because we would have to investigate it, figure out how it works. But yeah, that's also a possibility.
So, I mean, my gut feeling is I'm sort of with Eric on this. That would be good if it's a special case thing that people want to use in very specific circumstances. We should keep it isolated so it doesn't mess up everything else that we use. But we've been, I'm thinking with the volume local cache, we imposed some testing requirements as part of the implementation. So Liang Fang's working on or he's got the DevStack plugin to put the cache into DevStack, and then we can run all the tests on it. I'd like to do a similar thing here, so that it's a special case thing. Not a lot of people are going to use it, but we do want to know that it's well tested, even though we personally probably aren't going to be using this thing. So I guess that being said, so I don't have particular ideas at the moment, but I think we would want to make sure that they've got some kind of good testing job that uses Tempest scenario tests or something to make sure this thing's functioning correctly.
It would be pretty straightforward, I think, because basically it's the LIO job with a single node, enabling, in this case, changing if with his proposal, it would be changing the target. With my proposal, would be just setting a configuration option.
Mm-hmm. So either way, we should be able to test it pretty well.
Mhm.
Okay, well, since the proposer's not here, I guess we'll let them bring it up again at a Cinder meeting, and we can discuss it.
Well, I don't know if we should first discuss if we are willing to accept anything at all, any of the solutions that we propose.
Well, that was kind of my take on it. Is I don't see a very strong case to just outright reject it. Honestly, I mean, if it's shaped right, then I'm fine with putting it in there and putting disclaimers on it and whatever.
How are we going to test it and CI it? And since it's technically a new form of a driver, it should conform to the rest of the standards that we have.
It can just copy if it uses the target, it just clones the LIO job and changes the target. Because the standard DevStack deployment is a single node, so it will be doing the direct attachment.
So they're getting lucky in this case because it's a single node dev
Yep.
stack, which has Cinder and Nova on it at the same time, which is not really, which is a test, but not the use case in which it will be used.
No, it is the use case it will be used because they want to collocate them. That is the premise of the whole
Right, but
thing,
you're getting
which
the
we
Cinder
all find
API
weird.
and Cinder scheduler and everything else on the same host. Anyway,
Yeah, but you don't really care where those are in this case. You just care Cinder volume, Nova compute. That's what you care about for the testing.
So it looks like there would be a way to test this. But I guess the question is, do we want to encourage this or not? So it sounds like Eric thinks there's not a good argument to deny it. So basically, it would be just consuming review bandwidth from the project point of view.
and I guess we just have to ensure that whoever creates this target driver is going to add documentation on its limitations and what it won't be able to do. Then yeah, they can test it and whatnot. Then I'd be fine with it. Whatever.
From my point of view, it would be better to get separate driver based on LIO or on TGT admin or whatever. So it will prevent us to add a new config option. It will be easier to duplicate this target driver if we decide to do it. But if we introduce a new config option, somebody else could use it and will be a more complicated deprecation period or some fixing or etc. etc.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, well, I guess we can leave this. Hopefully the proposer can watch the recording and then look at our notes and bring it back once they've decided exactly what they want to do. I personally like the idea of keeping it as isolated as possible. But yeah, I guess that's all there is to say about it. Any other follow-up or last-minute comments or anything about this idea?
I do wonder if one way to describe this as far as the use case and who's interested in it is if this is this kind of seems a lot like you're taking the concept of like Nova ephemeral and having Cinder manage it, which is, I don't know, just trying to frame in my head exactly what this thing is.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay. Good. Well, Walt, glad to see you here. Since you've done most of the work on the Ceph iSCSI driver, so really I'd like you to talk about this. So I don't know if anybody saw it yesterday. Walt wrote a very nice email about this on the mailing list, sort of updating where we're standing on this project. And I don't know, I'm trying to remember the name of the person. So there is it was the High Performance Computing Group of a company in the UK that's very interested in this. And mentioned on the email thread that they would be able to devote some resources. But is anybody here? Let me look at that. I think there's definitely still interest.
Kevin Z.
Kevin Z. Okay.
Yeah, Kevin.
It was.
Oh, hi. Well, welcome.
All right, so I guess I'll start a little bit. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read what I had written yesterday with respect to the current status or the status as of when I paused working on it. The last couple months, I've been using some of my spare cycles at work to see what the current state of the world is with respect to some of the packages and whatnot, and try and come up with an alternate way of doing testing. So ultimately the problem that made me pause working on Ceph iSCSI is not the driver, it's not Ceph, it is getting CI working. And at the time which I started this, which was in 2018 or 19, the only way to deploy and get Ceph iSCSI working, even according to the Red Hat documentation, was to manually install from source code some of the dependencies, TCMU runner, target CLI-FB, and the Ceph iSCSI packages. And so all of that works if you do go down that route. And so I set off with updating the plugin for DevStack for Ceph to add hooks in it to allow you to configure some of the required features for getting Ceph iSCSI working, and the driver for Cinder, which is written. and unfortunately includes installing some of these requirements from source, which means doing a git clone from GitHub and doing all of the needful for installing those packages there. And so I put that up for review, and there's like 5 or 6 patches that I had up to make all this stuff work. And ultimately, it all got rejected because of the fact that the only way, according to the documentation and everything that I saw, to get those dependencies installed was to clone from source and install from source. And so those were declared as unreleased software, even though that there's releases in GitHub that you can do tarballs and whatnot, because the major distributions didn't have pre-packaged RPMs, debs for all those packages. So it was rejected until that was resolved. So, I can't force Ubuntu to create packages for those, and I didn't have the cycles to do that. And even Fedora and Red Hat didn't have them at the time either. So the last couple of months, I set out to trying to use Ceph Ansible, because Ceph Ansible has mechanisms for setting up the repositories, for pointing to the current versions of where Ceph is and all the packages that Red Hat has created for Fedora, CentOS. And I tried doing deployments of that and ran into many different problems with Ceph Ansible. There's actually some dependencies and bugs in there for packages that don't even exist anymore. So I kind of got stuck with that. And that was just the last couple of weeks that I kind of looked at that. But right before this meeting, I decided to spin up Ubuntu 2004 and see if they had packages for those dependencies, and they in fact do now.
Yeah, yes. We also see that, yeah.
So I had just discovered that, and so I will probably, in my spare cycle, spend some time to see if I can get this whole tool chain working again, which means spinning up DevStack, installing all the deps, including any updates that I have to make for the existing DevStack plugin to install all of those things, and then see if the driver still works. Because I'd written a driver with a dependency on the RBD iSCSI client that I wrote that talks to the target CLI iSCSI client service that gets installed in Ceph. But that was over a year ago, so I need to make sure that works. So there's a lot of backtracking to make sure that the whole state of the world works as it was when I paused this last year or a year and a half ago. And knock on wood, if all of that stuff works, then I can update all of my patches, and, in a perfect world, then, we can get CI working, and Infra happy with the CI, and then, of course, the volume driver gets tested, and everybody's happy with that, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the history as well as the current state of the world.
Okay. Oh, this is Sinan. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Kevin, the poster maybe has some problem joining the meeting. He can't say anything to us, and I am the colleague of him. Yeah, we also regarding to the package, we also found that Fedora also had a package dependent package. Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe we can keep things go on because the package is provided by the Ubuntu and Fedora, and we can continue on the start CI the stacking CI job. Yeah.
I also realized that there's a review up in for the plugin to update the version of Ceph from Luminous to, I don't know what version it is, to the latest version. Let me put it in the
latest version.
Oops. Anyway, anyway, so that's the review. I posted it in the Etherpad for updating the DevStack plugin
Okay.
to an updated version of Ceph, because the one that we've had in our CI jobs is pretty old by now.
Okay.
So we should also encourage and review that and help get that in, because we'll probably rely on that at some point as well, because a lot of the Ceph iSCSI stuff looks like it's changed since Luminous quite a bit.
Yeah, we also found that Ceph iSCSI Gravane are not working by setup via the DevStack. Yeah.
So I would love to still get this in, because I've put a lot of time into it. The client that I wrote is very involved and has a very well-documented API that talks to the Ceph iSCSI target on the Ceph side of things, and the driver seemed to just work for the most part, but it obviously hasn't been extensively tested in all its capabilities, because it's a derivation of the existing Ceph driver for volume provisioning, snapshotting, all that stuff. But really the only difference is how it is doing the exports. So initialize connection, disconnect, things like that.
So on the dependency issues, I had tried at some point last year picking apart what was going on with the dependencies in the CentOS and Fedora world, and it was pretty bad looking at the time. But I was looking, it looks like I was flipping through our Red Hat Ceph product documentation, and it looks like on the current version of the Ceph product and RHEL 8, they actually support this stuff now with Ceph Ansible, which would make me hope that the upstream CentOS world and Ceph packages and stuff might be in a bit better shape. But I haven't looked at it in quite a while. But I may I still have some interest in this driver too, so I may try to poke around and see if that's better enabled in the CentOS Fedora world than it used to be.
Okay, that would be great, because I ran into several Ceph Ansible issues that I posted as issues on GitHub, and they've been sitting there for a while without anybody looking at them. And if you try and run this Ceph Ansible on any recent version of CentOS or Fedora, it just simply won't work, because there's dependencies in there for packages that don't exist anymore, and they've been renamed or removed or whatnot. So I don't know what the state of the world of the GitHub version of Ceph Ansible versus Red Hat's internal one, if there is a difference or not, but it's it was a rat hole that I had to go down in order to get anything working again locally here. So I think I posted a couple of those links in the mailing list post that I did yesterday, for what it's worth. But as a side, the DevStack plugin does not use Ceph Ansible. It uses a lot of manual hand-coded magic to do installs of packages and stuff, which makes me wonder, what is the blessed way of doing Ceph installs? Is it still Ceph Ansible? Even in its broken state, which I was kind of confused by all that. I know there's a bunch of guys doing work with Rook, but that's assuming that you have a Kubernetes cluster installed, and I don't want to have to do that just to get DevStack testing done.
Just for the node, OpenStack Helm could be used in all-in-one deployments on the single node, but it consumes pretty much resources. I mean, RAM.
Yeah, I tried locally to install Ceph Ansible using a containerized deployment, and that was a whole set of nightmares of failures too. I even branched the Ceph Ansible tree and hacked it to make it work with Podman, which they're not even using Docker anymore because Docker has problems on the latest versions of Fedora, CentOS, and Red Hat. So they switched to using Podman, which implements, for the most part, most of the Docker APIs, but it's a rat hole. And I just wanted to get back to working on the driver and testing that, and it was way too easy to get rat holed on Ceph install or deployment related issues. But the easiest way to get all this to work is if the DevStack plugin works on a version of a distro that has existing packages that we can force the CI system to only deploy this Zool test against. If we can constrain the deployment against that particular distro, which we know has the dependent packages and the install can work on it, then the Cinder volume driver doesn't care. So I'm going to try Ubuntu Focal for now and see if I can get everything stood up on it and see what happens.
It will be a good starting point. We can add CentOS or Fedora in the future if needed.
Yep. And if you want to work in parallel and see what the state of the world with respect to CentOS, Fedora, Red Hat, with respect to all this and getting, Ceph deployment to work easier, then by all means. I mean, I could use some other eyes and help with that aspect of it, because that's really the stumbling block that I've been having for the most part.
Yeah, I'll try to take a look at it.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Overall, this sounds kind of promising, so that's good. And then maybe Kevin's having trouble with his microphone. Maybe he can communicate with you, Walt, offline. About coordinating stuff so you can set things up.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'm in the IRC channel as usual.
Okay, great. All right, any final comments about this one? All right, good. All right, yeah, it's good to see that this is. I'm sure you're glad to see this after all the time you put in on it, Walt. Okay. Next thing up is removing the volume driver ABC classes. So this one's Eric.
Yes. So, a few years ago, we had this idea that we would split the volume driver into a bunch of subclasses that use ABC and have classes for things like extend and manage and various Cinder operations. That would, I don't know. So we have a whole bunch of code that didn't work out very well, and we need to get rid of it. Is the point. We have, I don't know, 8 or 10 classes that are parts of this volume driver thing between base VD and extended VD and manageable VD. And the theory, I think, when we implemented this was that this was going to help us have a better shaped interface for volume drivers, just code-wise, and let us enforce things a little better and check whether drivers supported something or not based on all these classes. It didn't really work because I think that it just wasn't really a situation where using ABC helped us in any tangible way. And so there's been a to-do for a couple of years now for somebody to go undo all that stuff. And we just haven't done it. But the general idea would be to start working on removing these various classes and get back to having a volume driver class that is just a single class instead of all these subclasses with ABC methods on them. I don't know that this is terribly complicated to do. It's just a bunch of code that somebody's going to have to spend a lot of time shuffling around. But it would be good if anybody had an interest in doing it.
I'll look into the record.
I didn't catch that. What was that?
Ivan. Lord.
Hey, you're breaking up, Ivan.
Do you hear me?
No, not really.
It's strange.
All right. Well, he was saying in the chat that he may want to help with this.
Okay. What's the impact likely to be on actual drivers? This.
So I think the way that we should probably do this is somebody's echoing a bit here, but I think the way we should probably do this is maybe phase it over a cycle or so. I'm not sure, but because if you just delete all the classes, then drivers that aren't in the tree are gonna just not work until somebody restructures them and all that. What I would suggest doing is maybe not as the first step, delete all of these classes, but take off all the ABC stuff and make them basically classes that don't do anything, but that are still there. And when we do this, we'll want to go through the drivers in the tree and change the inheritance to be, from volume driver instead of volume driver, comma, 3 other classes. So probably, we should probably have a good plan for what it actually takes to do it, and then tell the community of people interested in Cinder drivers, this change is coming and it will break stuff for you if you're not in the tree. I don't know how we want to manage that exactly, but as far as
so can I ask a question related to this? I mean, what are we gaining by doing all this work at this point? I mean, this stuff has been around for quite a long time, as unclean, I guess, as it is.
Well,
I kind of think it's sort of clean, but what are we going to gain from it? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the first thing is anybody who's going to write a new driver will have a sensible looking API to write against. It's a lot less complicated. A lot of it is really just about getting rid of a bunch of code that we don't need.
Well, I think the original intent of the ABC classes and whatnot was to make it more clear what a new driver developer needs to implement in order to be a driver that supports replication or cloning or managing snapshots or migration, because those ABC classes are very well defined. So I'm not sure it's going to be better by, if we magically go ahead and go forward in the future and have all this stuff. What does the code actually, the end result, look like? Because if we're just going to take these baby steps along the way, it's going to look uglier and uglier until we finally get there. I think that's my intuition. For what benefit? I guess that's really why I'm concerned about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I'm coming at this mostly from I want to have an API that's shaped as well as it could be and is nice and clean looking. And my assumption is that this is not a terribly hard thing to do. It's just something that involves shuffling through a whole bunch of lines of code.
For now, we've got two different ways to say what driver should implement. We've got ABC classes in Cinder volume driver model, and we've got Cinder interface model with some ABC classes for drivers.
Yeah, that's the work that Sean initially did several years ago now in the initial effort to migrate away from ABC was to create these interface classes, which I think make a lot more sense.
Yes.
Personally than the ABC stuff. So, I mean,
so it seems to be reasonable to go away from old ABC classes and use new interface classes. Or not. Interface classes is a bad name, but use classes within interface model.
yeah. I guess one of the first things we'll have to find out is, if we got rid of ABC entirely, like Eric was saying, as a first step, and changed none of the other classes, how much stuff is going to be broken? How many drivers are going to break? To be able to lean on the CI to find out that information, but
honestly, it will be a hard task because you know how our third-party CI works time by time.
That's not a third-party CI concern. That's a unit testing concern. If we are just stripping out the ABC stuff and leaving all the classes there, I don't know why the main test for that would be third-party CI.
Yes, fair enough.
That's
just to make sure that the drivers work still. That's a major fundamental change of the base classes for the volume driver, just to make sure that they all still work. I think that's
the unit concern primarily.
In any case, any changes to driver's code will be good to have third-party CI vote.
That's the entire point of having third-party CI was initially that if any changes in Cinder were made, that we didn't break drivers. I mean, it's probably a really simple patch to put up and just to remove the ABC and nothing else and just see what happens in the CIs.
I think we should just go in this way and see what driver maintainers and CI will say for us.
I mean, a local unit test run would also be helpful, but at the end of the day, the CI stuff, we can't be breaking drivers.
So in terms of how important this is, so like comparing this to improving the quotas stuff, for instance? How would you rank this?
Well, this is a concern for driver developers. It's not a concern for users.
Thinking in terms of like technical debt. So actually, since today's driver's day, and there's a lot of driver people here, right, who've implemented drivers or been maintaining them, what do you think of this idea?
Well, since nobody else is talking, I think at the end of the day, if we can create a single source of interface class that defines the feature set to develop a new driver instead of this dual model that we have now, which is the interface classes versus the ABC classes. If we can eliminate one of those and we stick with one, I think that would be better for new driver developers for sure. For existing drivers, as long as they don't break it, then who cares?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we definitely want to have clear interfaces designed and a clear way to do it. Okay. So is anyone excited about, I guess Yvonne indicated some excitement about this.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so it sounds worth doing. It sounds like there's a few people who want to do it, so sounds good. I mean, I like the idea of going to interface classes. I think that would be nice. Any other general comments or anything? Okay. Um, okay. We're about halfway through. I guess this would be a good time to let's take a 6-minute break and reconvene at 14:30, which is 6 minutes from now. So I'll stop the recording and then restart it when we get back. Okay, so get up, stretch, move around, and see you in 5 minutes.
See you in 5.